everyone. It's so good to be with you. I welcome this opportunity to talk with you about our Kairos Palestine document and to listen to your concerns and perspectives. Thank you for opening this door for this conversation and for deeper understanding. These last 2 years have been devastating for us, so being connected with our brothers and sisters in faith means everything.
Well, I hope no one will mind me saying this, but I'm really not sure about this study. I worry about it being divisive. Emotions run hot around these issues, and I really don't want to stir things up too much.
Yeah, for my part, and with all due respect, I think we could do with some stirring things up. I've been really upset by the things I'm seeing on social media, the horrible destruction, the killing of women and children, the deliberate starvation in Gaza. I can't believe our government is funding these atrocities, and I think as Christians, we need to be talking about it. I'm looking to my church for guidance on these issues.
Okay, but from what I've been reading in this document, Israel comes off as the bad guy. Now, don't get me wrong, I certainly don't think Israel is beyond reproach. They certainly have done things that have shocked the conscience. That's no doubt about it. But don't Christians have an obligation to support the Jewish people, especially in light of the Holocaust?
Thanks for that, Elaine. I'm glad that we can address this here at the beginning of our conversation. We do have an obligation to support the Jewish people. Absolutely. In fact, when boatloads of Jewish refugees came to our shores in Palestine fleeing persecution, we Palestinians welcomed them. We took them into our homes and we extended a helping hand, as the Arab world has done for our Jewish cousins seeking refuge from European pogroms for hundreds of years. We have an equally strong obligation to support fellow Christians, especially when they are facing death and destruction, as we Palestinian Christians are in Gaza and the West Bank. And we have an obligation to support our Muslim Palestinian brothers and sisters and all of our fellow human beings and children of God made in the image of God. We're very clear. We say we strongly condemn anti-Semitism and all forms of racism, exclusion, and prejudice, including Islamophobia.
Yeah. Yeah, along those lines, I believe in supporting Jews, but I have serious problems with Israel. And I don't think that's a contradiction. Some people try to say that it is, but it's not. There's a key difference between the Jewish people and the modern state of Israel. Blurring that difference leads to misunderstanding.
Definitely, yeah. And that's why we make a distinction between Judaism and Zionism. We know that they're not the same thing. We express it this way in our document, where we say that Zionist ideology claims to represent and protect the Jewish people. But in doing so, it has conflated the words Jew and Zionist as though they are one and the same. Not every Jew is a Zionist and not every Zionist is a Jew. This confusion has done great harm to Judaism itself and to its image worldwide.
Hmm. Well, the idea that not all Jews are Zionists is very surprising to me. It's not what I was raised with. And I have been hearing about younger people, though, here in America, Jewish people that are cutting ties with Israel, especially since the death and destruction in Gaza. And seeing groups like Jewish Voice for Peace demonstrating in the rotunda of the Capitol, wearing T-shirts that say another Jew against genocide and genocide is now, that is pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, the other side of that, Lane, that not every Zionist is a Jew, is also a thing. I'm thinking of all the Christians who proudly see themselves as Zionists, like former President Joe Biden and Texas Senator Ted Cruz, like all those churches that post Stand with Israel signs and have the Israeli flag in their sanctuaries. That's pretty mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, David, and these are key examples of Christian Zionism. We Christians have a special responsibility for all the damage that Zionism has done because the first Zionists were actually Christians, not Jews. We set all of this in motion. In the mid 1800s, evangelical Christians who were obsessed with end time prophecies in the Bible believed that Christ would return once all of the world's Jewish people gathered in the Holy Land. So rather than view the second coming as a distant hope, they set out to force God's hand and to make the ingathering of Jews a reality. Christian Zionists promoted the immigration of Jews to Palestine, not because they were interested in a Jewish homeland or out of particular concern for the Jewish people, but because they believed that it would trigger the apocalypse, which was what they wanted.
And today, from what I understand, Christian Zionism is a powerful political movement influencing our nation's foreign policy. They've captured important positions in Congress and the executive branch. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee are avowed Christian Zionists. They are strongly pro-Israel. They support illegal settlements in the West Bank and maximum military spending for Israel. I heard Ambassador Huckabee say he doesn't think Palestinians even exist or that they have rights. What does the Kairos Palestine II document say about that?
Yeah, we use some of our strongest language to denounce Christian Zionism. And let me be very clear. Christian Zionism is a racist, supremacist ideology. It grants privileges to Jews that it denies to Palestinians. It dehumanizes Palestinians while it upholds Jews as specially chosen and entitled. Its theology has supported apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and the genocide of indigenous people. So we name it for what it is, a theological distortion and a corruption of the core values of Christian faith and ethics. Dialogue with Christian Zionists and sincere invitations to repent have been exhausted. The time has come to reject and to boycott this ideology. We feel strongly that churches throughout the world must repudiate Zionist theology in all of its forms, beginning with Zionism among Christians. If I may speak personally here, it's shocking and it's painful for us to see the positions of many churches in America, especially when they adopt the colonizer's narrative or even just remain silent in the face of the genocide of our people.
Well, when you say the colonizer's narrative, do you mean Israel?
Yes, I do. Because for us, Israel is what we call a settler colonial regime. This is a term from anthropologists, but it means much more than academic jargon to us. It's helped us make sense of our lived experiences. It's been going on for over 100 years in Palestine, starting out with the Balfour Declaration in 1917, when the British government just decided, without ever consulting us, that the European Jews could come and take over our country, settle it, and make it their own. It's why the Kairos Palestine doc in the Kairos Palestine document we say that Israel is a colonial, settler, and exclusionary entity built upon the displacement of the indigenous population and the replacement of the indigenous population with new settlers.
That sounds an awful lot like what Israel's military is doing in Gaza and what the settlers are doing in the West Bank: genocide and ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, thank you for making that connection, David. It's true, and it's so outrageous and devastating. It's been extremely difficult for us to understand why so many churches have either been silent while we have been slaughtered or are so ready to call these atrocities, quote, self-defense.
But I hate to say it, but I do think Israel has a right to defend itself. I mean, after all, it was Hamas who attacked Israel on October 7th.
And Elaine, we have to remember that October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum, right? It occurred in the context of decades of Israeli injustice, oppression, and forcible displacement, as well as more than 16 years of an immoral and suffocating blockade on Gaza. And I want to say that mentioning this context doesn't justify the killing or the capturing of civilians, the violation of international law or norms, or war crimes. But also, in addition to this, we have to ask how a colonizer can defend itself against those it has colonized and expelled from their land. We insist that Israel can't invoke the right of self-defense as though it's a normal country, because it's not. It's a colonial power stealing our land and killing our people. International law does not give a colonial power the right to defend itself. In fact, it guarantees the colonized and occupied people the right to resist occupation by any means necessary, including armed resistance. The International Court of Justice has ruled Israel's occupation of Palestine as illegal, and they say it must end.
As Americans in our Revolutionary War against the British, we took up arms to fight for our freedom. It's not hard for me to understand how Palestinians would decide to do the same thing. I don't think of myself as a violent person, but I have to say that I have no idea what it would be like to live in an open air prison. to spend essentially my whole young life under a suffocating siege, the losses I would endure, the sense that life was never going to get better, and that I really didn't have a future and what that might lead me to do. I think about that. A violent response to shake off the oppressor is totally understandable. So it's astonishing that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians, Christian and Muslim, are nonviolent and remain committed to nonviolence. Speaking of which, I really appreciate that the Kairos Palestine document lifts up love and nonviolence. It reminds me very much of Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement. For the last couple of years, many of our congregations have been wrestling with racial justice. Seminars, sermons, book groups, dismantling racism workshops. I think these experiences can help us see the Palestinian struggle for freedom and justice in a similar light.
Yeah, thank you for noticing those connections, David. They're very alive for us. The Kairos Palestine II document talks a lot about what we call costly resistance, which to my mind points to the cross. One of my favorite passages reminds me that as Christians, our movement is grounded in, quote, the logic of love and nonviolence. In the document, it says, hope is a living act of resistance, steadfastly refusing the reality of death imposed upon us, confronting and resisting every form of injustice and occupation. Jesus Christ walked with the poor and the weak, stood beside the oppressed, and never abandoned love or compromised truth and justice. For the sake of the salvation of humanity, he accepted the cross. His resurrection was victory over death and injustice, and it was a sign of hope rooted in faith. This is the faith that sustains us today.
That's a good word, Nadia. I appreciate that. I'd like to ask about the Abraham Accords. It seems like a positive development, a real opening for peace in a war-torn region, a win-win. But KP2 is opposed to the Accords. Could you help me understand why?
Sure. The Abraham Accords promise peace, but it is a false peace based on betrayal. The Accords follow a colonial pattern of failing to acknowledge our humanity and excluding us. American, Israeli, and Arab counterparts met without us and never seriously engaged our perspectives and long-standing concerns. The Hebrew scriptures teach us that true peace must be built on a foundation of justice. False prophets are those who cry peace, peace, even when there's no peace. Any peace that offers normalized relations between Israel and the Arab world without redress for the injustice of the Israeli occupation and apartheid, and without affirming the right of return and equal rights and Palestinian self-determination, and without accountability for war crimes, is really just a false peace. The Abraham Accords is a normalization agreement that ignores the brutal, unjust realities of our lives. And that just has to be completely unacceptable to us.
We touched on the word genocide earlier in our conversation. We just stay on that topic for a moment. As I'm sure you're all aware, there is a lot of controversy around the word genocide. My Jewish friends feel insulted when people say Israel's committing genocide. It's hurtful and it's offensive to them. And I know also that our pastor has worked really hard to build interfaith relationships with the Jewish community. And that has resulted in a warm friendship with the rabbi of the conservative synagogue in our city. I really worry about those hard-won friendships might unravel. I just can't see using a word that's hurtful to people that we care about.
Before you answer that question, Nadia, let me just say that I have Jewish friends too, and they don't have any trouble using the word genocide. In fact, they insist on it. Not to deny what Elaine is bringing up, but only to say that, in my experience, the feelings she's describing are not shared by all Jews. I also have to wonder why we're not even asking about how all of this is landing with Palestinians.
Thank you both for your honesty. And I have to say, it's just been maddening to watch so many American Christians allow themselves to be tied up in knots about terminology. It all seems so abstract and far removed from the unspeakable violence and trauma that we've been enduring. The Palestinians were being slaughtered, and you all are debating semantics. Genocide is not abstract to us. It's been an ominous shadow in our history for over a century, culminating in the mass death and destruction in Gaza. It began, quote, in the minds of the settler colonial powers of Europe, a racist, dehumanizing ideology that worked to displace us from the time of the Nakba until today. And from a faith standpoint, it's so clear to us that genocide is a structural sin against God, against humanity, and against creation. And it's opposed to the great commandment of love. As this congregational study guide, A Moment of Truth, Faith in the Time of Genocide, puts it, those who deny the genocide committed against the Palestinian people, despite the overwhelming evidence, the testimonies, and even the statements of the Zionists themselves, deny the very humanity of the Palestinian people. And we have a right to ask, how can one speak of Christian fellowship or communion while denying, supporting, justifying, or remaining silent before genocide?